Hello, I am Mac, at least for a day, and everything's going to be okay. In this video, we're going to be discussing if we're going to get a combat update in the No Man's Sky 2021 anniversary update. So, a bit about combat and combat updates in No Man's Sky. In my opinion, we've actually had a lot of updates to combat in No Man's Sky over the years. First we got to start with an operational definition of what a combat update is. I would say that any time that new weapons are added to the game, or any time new enemies are added to the game, is a combat update. And I mean, that could also include an entirely new system of combat as well. But for the most part, the updates to combat in No Man's Sky have fit in those categories, either giving new weapons to the player or adding new enemies or changing the attack patterns and damage of enemies. So I would say the first time we got an update to combat was the Pathfinder update, which was the second big update we ever got. Oh, it said toxic protection falling. I better recharge that. In the Pathfinder update was when we got new weapons for the ship. So I don't know what they were called back then. The first time they added new weapons to the ship, actually they weren't even separate weapons, they were new upgrades. That was it. So they added some upgrades to the ship that gave you, faster firing on your photon cannon, and things like that. We had upgrades before, but they didn't really change much. But we got some upgrades that like you could really tell you were really rapid firing. Once you got all those new upgrades installed, you had some really crazy combat capability. Sadly, they kind of nerfed that because later, after the Pathfinder update, they split it up so that you couldn't have all those upgrades on the photon cannon, because it used to be you could put the crazy rapid fire and increased damage and everything all on the photon cannon. So the photon cannon basically became a constant stream of projectiles that was just way overpowered. So then later they split it up, I believe in the Atlas Rises update. Yeah, and the Atlas Rises update was when we got the weird weapons that we have today, the cyclotron ballista, the infra knife accelerator, whatever the other one is called, in addition to the photon cannon and the lasers. And then I think I don't want to say wrong, but at some point we also got new weapons for the multi-tool. We got the pulse spitter. I think it was the same time as Atlas Rises, maybe it was the next update. But we got the pulse spitter. They used to have different names. They changed the names later, but we got the pulse spitter, the blaze javelin, and the shotgun one that I can never remember the name of. So yeah, they've added new weapons for us. Of course, adding new weapons without increased enemies is kind of dumb, because that just makes the game easier. But of course, after a long time, they finally started adding some new enemies. But before, all we ever had was the regular sentinels, which I don't see any sentinels around. I purposefully came to a higher sentinel planet so that I could have some sentinels in my combat video, but I haven't seen any sentinels yet. That's the one thing. In a way, in one update, they quote-unquote updated combat by decreasing the amount of sentinels so that you don't have to constantly be annoyed by them. In a sense, that's a combat update, but actually that actually decreases the amount of combat you do. And they also they majorly changed the way Sentinels work, which also decreased combat. So it used to be that if a Sentinel sees you doing something you're not supposed to and attacks you, if you killed the Sentinel, you would lose all your Sentinel hate and you'd be fine. So back then, you killed Sentinels a lot more. Like, you were always killing Sentinels because killing the Sentinels got rid of them. You didn't have to worry about them anymore. Now it's more of a police wanted system where if you kill the Sentinels, that gets you a higher wanted level, more Sentinels show up, so that actually discourages you from fighting Sentinels, because the more Sentinels you kill, the higher your wanted level, and they'll never stop coming. So that actually kind of decreased the amount of combat you do. But anyway, back to the issue of new enemies. So, there's a Sentinel. For the longest time, all we had were Sentinels and predators or other creatures on a planet. Predators were the only ones that would attack you. Creatures on planet, herbivore creatures on planets didn't attack you, although at one point they changed behavior so that killing the babies of herbivores would cause their parents to attack you. So herbivores can attack you sometimes in certain situations. But let me get to the new enemies. So in the I believe the next update. In the next update was when they add biological horrors. Biological horrors were the first new enemy we ever got. Because they're not the same as creatures. They're a separate class because they don't roam around. They appear when you take their eggs, and when you kill them, they don't leave behind bodies like creatures do. And of course, they're a lot scarier, and they have a different attack patterns, etc. So that was a new enemy. So when they added biological horrors, that was essentially a combat update as well. And then at another point, they added corrupted sentinels, which unfortunately, corrupted sentinels are extremely rare. They used to only appear when you dig up buried tech on the special, like, satellite buried tech that are on special planets. That was the only time they would appear. Now there is a Nexus mission that can also spawn sentinels when you rescue a stranded life form, and when you go to try to find the tech for them, which is essentially the same thing. The sentinels appear when you're messing with special technology you're not supposed to. Then the corrupted sentinels appear. Corrupted sentinels are essentially the same as sentinels as far as their attack patterns, as far as I can tell. They just shoot at you and float around to slightly dodge you, and you kill them. Difference is they're actually easier because once you kill the corrupted sentinels, you don't have a wanted level. In fact, you don't have a wanted level at all when corrupted sentinels are attacking you. So they're kind of a duty-free sentinel, and they're cooler looking, so that's good. But I mean, they're super rare. I wish they would have utilized them more than they have. And then the third, they added several new enemies in the Desolation update. They added the new type of biological horrors, the little babies that hatch out of nests in derelict freighters. So derelict freighters were added, and there are essentially three to four different new types of enemies, but they're only in derelict freighters. So we got the baby biological horror things. We've got floating drones that attack you, and we've got turrets that attack you in sorry, my mind is somewhere else. In derelict freighters. And then there's also jellyfish, which are, you can barely call them enemies because they rarely ever get to you to hurt you, but they will hurt you if you let them get close to you, but they're super easy to just shoot and kill Man, these things are weird, undulating and moving. Um, but anyway, yeah, so there's essentially four different new enemies in. So I would say that the Desolation update was pretty much the biggest combat update we get, and also they changed some mechanics for player weapons in the Desolation update. In fact, Hello Games actually said that the Desolation update was a combat update, and it pretty much was the biggest change to combat that we ever had. The sad thing is that it was mostly localized to the derelict freighters, the four new enemies at least. But they did change bolt casters. They basically made bolt casters weaker, which, makes combat more challenging. Bolt caster now fires in bursts instead of a constant machine gun, which makes sense because the pulse spitter is also an automatic machine gun, meaning if you hold down the trigger, it fires constantly until you run out of ammo. Which was exactly the same as the bolt caster. Bolt caster also was automatic. You just hold it down, it would fire constantly. So I always thought, like, why did we have the bolt caster on the pull and the pulse spitter when they essentially did the same thing? So they changed it so that bolt caster fires in burst. You hold down the trigger, it fires a burst, and then it won't fire anymore until you let go of the trigger and push down the trigger again. So bolt caster is a bit weaker in that sense. And that thing makes things more challenging. Of course, you can just get the pulse spitter. It does less damage, but it fires constantly in comparison to the bolt caster. So anyway, and then in the most recent update, the Expeditions update, they essentially changed combat, pretty much just buffing the quadruped sentinels, the four-legged dog sentinels. They made them stronger, and I've definitely noticed that. I've tried fighting them. They're a lot more difficult to kill. They also made it so that sentinel walkers drop out of the sky when they spawn instead of just appearing out of nowhere, which is really cool. It's basically the same as when you summoned the mech suit vehicle. It drops out of the sky. But that doesn't really change combat. That's just a new animation for the walker appearing. But, so that is, sorry, that was very rambly and very long. That's a brief-ish history of combat improvements in No Man's Sky. I know I'm forgetting something. They made other tweaks here and there. But let's move on to actually talking about how they can improve combat. So, like I said, there's been a lot of combat improvements. So the question is, does Hello Game think combat needs to be improved more? I know the fans believe it does. And a big thing that people request isn't ground combat, but space combat. In fact, this has been an issue since No Man's Sky came out. So we had the old E3 presentation back in the day that Sean Murray did, where he did the now notorious quote where he said, "This is the boundary between two warring factions," and it showed freighters shooting at each other. And basically people want that. They want combat between freighters. We have freighter battles, and I'm not really sure why people aren't satisfied with it. Freighter battles are when you warp into a system after a certain amount of time, there'll be a whole bunch of freighters, and there'll be space pirate enemy ships flying around them, shooting at them, and then you can choose to help rescue the freighters by killing the enemy fighters. People don't think that's the same as the thing we saw in E3. They think that there could be something better. And honestly, I'm not sure how that better thing would be. Please tell me in the comments, what would a freighter battle be? What would it need to be? How different would it need to be from what we have in order to be good? I guess they want to have the freighters shooting at each other, because essentially what a freighter battle is right now is a bunch of space pirates attacking freighters, and there's no combat between the freighters. I don't know why it's so important that that be the case, but that's what people seem to want. I mean, a lot of things that people want in the game are just, things that they think would improve the game. But once we get them, people are like, "Oh, well, I'm glad we have that." A big example is multiplayer, because people wanted multiplayer for so long. When we got it, a lot of people didn't actually want it. They were like, "No, I don't want multiplayer." Obviously, some people do still like it and everything, but it's not a big deal anymore. So I think it's essentially the same with the freighters. If we got quote unquote actual freighter combat with freighters shooting at each other, I think people will get bored of it pretty quickly. But as long as we don't have it, people are obsessed with it and they have to have it. But anyway, I'm not sure how it would work. I guess they would have to make it so that freighters can be destroyed. Because right now, all you can do is destroy their little cargo capsules along the side of freighters. You can't completely destroy a freighter. It can't explode or basically turn into the wrecked freighters that you can find in space. They just get their cargo capsules destroyed. So I guess also we could have, since we have freighters, we can't actually do combat from our freighter. I think some people want that, like you could attack another freighter with your freighter. But for that, we would kind of need to be able to move our freighter. A big problem with that is the freighters don't move. And this is kind of running into the same problem that we had with water. You would essentially need to redo the physics engine, I think, in order to make that possible. You can't just make freighters suddenly able to move when they've never been able to move before. Obviously, small ships can move, but big freighters are, programmed to be just this static object in space after they warp in. Warping in is just basically an animation that spawns them into place. And they can never move. So that would be very difficult for you to be standing on a freighter and for the freighter to move. Yeah, I don't know how they would program that in. They could maybe do it, but I really don't know. So that's a difficulty. And so it doesn't really make sense for, at least for the player, to attack other freighters with your own freighter, because you wouldn't be able to fly over to them. I guess you could call your freighter near another freighter and start shooting at it that way. Although currently you can't really call your freighter very close to other freighters. You have to be pretty far from them. Although you could be close enough that you could shoot at them from a distance, and then they would send enemy fighters to attack your freighter and all that stuff. These are really cool caves on this planet. So yeah, there's a lot of difficulties to making an actual freighter battle as far as what people have been thinking they want from a freighter battle. Personally, I think that freighter battles are fine the way they are, just fighting the small fighters outside of the freighters, but people are probably never going to stop asking for quote-unquote actual freighter battles just because of that one Sean Murray quote. This is the border, or yeah, the border between two warring factions, or whatever he said. And that's another thing, is people want warring factions. We have no warring factions. We have three main races in addition to travelers: Viking, Korvax, and Gek. But they don't fight each other, even though supposedly they've had war with each other in the past. The only people that fight anyone are the pirates. There's not actually, nations fighting each other. So maybe that's something that they could look into making. So yeah, people want warring factions, freighter battles, and all that in space. So, but then, of course, people also want improved ground combat, which we've kind of gotten with the biological horrors, increasing the difficulty of Sentinel quadrupeds. But like I said, there's not a lot of incentive to fight sentinels because they made it so that the sentinels never stop coming if you attack them. So in a way, I honestly don't think we're going to get a lot more combat. Like, I don't think we're going to get like a combat only update. I don't think Hello Games is going to concentrate solely on combat in a single update. They're not going to say, okay, this is here is a really giant combat update, because they've always said that No Man's Sky is primarily an exploration game. No Man's Sky has combat, but combat has never been a main focus of the game. Maybe that could change, but I just don't see Hello Games concentrating on that, changing so that there's a whole lot of combat. Like, strolling around a planet, it's usually pretty peaceful. Like, a whole bunch of enemies aren't going to be attacking you. Not like in a game where combat is focused, where, like, say, Call of Duty. In a game like Call of Duty, you go into an area and there's enemies everywhere. You've constantly got to be shooting and fighting for your life, or somebody's going to snipe you and kill you. That's just not the way No Man's Sky is. For the most part, you can stroll around on a peaceful planet and pretty much only have combat if you go near a predator's territory, or you attack the sentinels, or you destroy stuff and make the sentinels mad at you, or you take the eggs of biological horrors, or you go somewhere really dangerous like a derelict freighter and disturb the enemies there. Combat has always kind of been optional in No Man's Sky. It's something that happens when you do something you're quote-unquote not supposed to, when you purposely go out looking for trouble. Or, yeah, if you take a mission where you're supposed to go into a combat situation and stuff. It's just kind of the way No Man's Sky is. It's a wasteland expanse exploring game. Oh, cool. That must be a trader that landed here. It's never been a game where you're just constantly having to look out for enemies and stuff. How do I interact with this guy without my heads-up display on? Let's turn the heads-up display back on. There we go. So yeah, in my opinion, No Man's Sky just isn't a combat game, and it may never be. They've done lots of tweaks and changes and improvements to combat, but they're never going to completely change the game to be a combat-focused game. But there's lots of ways that they can improve combat, like space combat, and they could add more enemies. Big thing people have always asked for is an actual villain. We have baddies, enemies that will attack you at times, but we've never had a character, an entity that is out to get you. Supposedly in the lore, there's some kind of sinister force out there, the Abyss, some mysterious stalking entity. I mean, the lore has alluded to that many times, that somebody is watching us, someone sinister is out there, but it's never really come into play. I would like it. Okay, let me tell you my big idea, if you've actually made it to this point in the video. I know it's getting really long, and I've been rambling, but my idea for storyline is my big thing, but a storyline that also has big improvement to combat, and also a completely new system of stuff. What I would like to see is a faction leader capital ships. So this is how it would work. Sometimes, rarely, you would go into a system, and there would be some kind of alert that the Korvax or the Viking or the Gek capital ship, like leader capital ship, is in that system. So you would go, there would be some kind of giant, it would be a new type of freighter, or it wouldn't be a freighter, it'd be a giant frigate ship that it would look special. It wouldn't look like the freighters we have now. It would be this cool thing. It would be, a giant, super giant frigate thing that you can go on board, and inside is the leader of the Korvax or the leader of the Viking. Now, I know that the Korvax don't really have a leader. The Korvax are a hive mind. They've talked about leaders among the Gek and the Viking. Like the Viking, I forget what it's called, but there's some kind of Viking council, war chief council. I mean, there's Viking war chiefs, and everything, and the Gek have like their merchant lords or whatever. So basically, there would be a Gek. So okay, let me give you my idea for all three. So the Gek, you would go on board, and there would be like this big meeting room for the Gek, and there would be a whole bunch of Gek overlords, or sorry, merchant lords, meeting at a table, and they would all have special outfits on that you've never had a Gek see before, like fancy robes. Like, imagine Star Wars, where, let's say the first Star Wars Episode 1, where you had the Jedi Council meeting in a circle, and you've got, the guy with the robe on, and Yoda, and all that stuff. Say we had that with Gek. So the Gek would have this big council room where they're the merchant lords, and they command the Gek underlings and lead them in trade and all that. And maybe you could do missions for the Gek there, and it'd be some kind of new storyline that will involve the factions, and you can maybe choose sides where you want to further the Gek's merchant lords' goals and stuff like that. And eventually you get to the point where you could search and you could find the Gek capital ship, on the galaxy map. I want to go see them. Oh, they're currently in that star system, so you could warp to that system and see where the Gek merchant lord vessel currently is. And then, of course, the Viking would have basically a single leader, like one war chief. So you'd go into his capital ship, and there'd be a throne room, and with a whole bunch of guards, and on the throne is this war chief guy, and he would give you commands and tell you to help him further the goals of the Gek war. Like the storyline could have some kind of war between the factions. Some new war breaks out, and you have to choose sides. Although ultimately you could play every side. You could play through the Gek storyline, furthering the Gek's goals, and then you could switch sides, and then you could work for the Viking war chief and do that. And then let's talk about the Korvax. So the Korvax vessel, the Korvax capital ship, would have a giant computer in it. So we know that the Korvax are basically joined in their own internet, which is called the darn, I'm gonna forget what it's called. It's the Korvax hive mind, but they call it the Convergence. That's it. So there's the Korvax Convergence, which is basically, I guess, just a network of all the Korvax. They can all communicate with each other. But I would like it if they had basically a supercomputer, which is the main server that helps connect all the Korvax. So you've got this capital ship, and inside would be this giant supercomputer thing, and which would basically be a way to communicate with the Korvax hive mind. It would talk to you, and the will of the Korvax all together would speak to you through this supercomputer. And there'd be Korvax in there maintaining the computer and all that, but that would basically be the Korvax leader. Even though it's not an individual mind, it would be just a hub, a center for the Korvax Convergence. I think that would be really cool. And then you could, do missions for the Korvax hive mind, the Korvax convergence, further their goals in whatever war is going on. So that is my idea for a story / combat update that No Man's Sky would do. I don't think that's going to happen. I wish No Man's Sky would do something like that, but that's just my idea. And I've rambled on long enough. This video is getting too long, but tell me your ideas. How could they improve combat further? How could they make combat more exciting? What is a freighter battle? What would make a freighter battle real and correct? Apparently, according to people, the freighter battles we have are not real freighter battles. Tell me what would make a freighter battle a freighter battle. And, anything else you want to tell me about combat, or give me other ideas, because I'm starting to run out of ideas for videos at this point. I need more ideas for speculation that we can do for the anniversary update. So, anyway, I have been Mac. Thank you for joining me for a day. And remember, everything's going to be okay.